So sometimes I forget to talk about the psychology of chess and how important it is to think about such things on like how we regulate ourselves, how we deal with anxiety, such and such. Um, it came to mind because one of our chess players at the university brought that up. Kind of how he plays kind of these mental tricks on others to change their behaviors and how they play. Um, and I guess it didn't dawn on me because I without intentionally thinking about it, I've worked on it for many years, having been exposed to many different chess clubs where there's many different people who are trying to manipulate you into playing poorly, right? So, for example, I mean, if you ever played in person chess, you've probably had at least one or two people who will like every now and then will like smash a piece down really hard as if to say like, oh, they got you, right? Or they played some really extraordinary move, or they make this like really big sacrifice and you're like, oh, they must have thought that through, and like it'll kind of take you aback and you may feel a little intimidated from that, especially if you're not used to it, right? So it's like, what is your initial thinking there? Like, are you thinking like, oh, they I must have missed something, right? So which is natural. Okay, if you didn't see it coming, yeah, you missed it. Though it's important to kind of like you know address that before you make a move. You don't want to have like an impulsive response to that, right? So how are you dealing with that thought? How are you processing it? Like if you find yourself getting dysregulated and anxious, how are you addressing that before making a decision? Because as we know, if your anxiety is spiked up, your decision making is not going to be as good as it normally would be. Um, and there's other instances where people like they'll like, not even like have to be like so flashy with it where like you're smashing down a piece, but let's say somebody makes a move very subtly and then it just gets up and walks away, right? Kind of maybe a little bit smug, maybe not, but it's like sometimes you may like perceive it as some assurance that they're in a good position, that they feel very confident about their position, that they made a really good move, right? So you may start doubting your position and you start focusing more on your mistakes and less on like what you could do to move forward, if you can find any tactical opportunities, if you can improve your position. Like you might not be focusing on the right things through the stuff like that, which is again is like, on one hand, it could be like a manipulation tactic. Wow, I couldn't say that word. Or it could just be the person, regulating themselves. Maybe they want to kind of calm themselves down, get a drink of water. Maybe they are really bored. Maybe they are really confident, right? But I guess the important piece is like how you're perceiving it and how it's affecting you and your play in real time. Um, so yeah, a lot of that to say that it's important to kind of be self-aware in how you respond to these things, and is a lot of it comes from experience. Like I said, I've been in many different chess clubs where people have tried all sorts of stuff to kind of get me to shake me, and a lot of it has worked. And then I thought about it and reflected on it, and also looked at the games, and to find the truth of the matter, especially when you have the opportunity to review the games. Like if you did chess notation, you recorded them and look at them through a computer, um, preferably before you look at it with your own eyes first, and then go through a computer. But whatever. And then you can see that the moves they made oftentimes were just flashy, right? They didn't really. I mean, it's not that they didn't do anything, but like it was unnecessary flashiness that was just designed to disrupt you. And when you kind of realize that more and more, you start to pay less attention to like the person and what they're doing. Like, let's say somebody makes a move and it just kind of gives you like a glare, like just glares you down, or like just a death stare, like and like you start to focus less on that. Like maybe you'll like let the thought pass you by and just like, okay, they think they did something here, but did they really? Right? So it's like that's the important part, where you can bring yourself back to like, is this really something? Did I really make a mistake? And if I made a mistake, how am I going to address that? How am I going to keep fighting? Because that's important, because if you kind of just roll over, and like if you make a mistake and you just roll over, and that means it just makes their game easier and you go down without a fight, right? There's sometimes where I look at a position, I'm playing a game, and I just kind of just realize like, oh, I'm actually worse. All right. Though, kind of also part of the psychology of it, like I don't want them to know that I know that it's worse, right? I want them to still think that I'm confidently going to be able to get through this, right? So I want to make it as hard on them as possible, which will be put a strain on them, and hopefully they'll make a mistake, and then I can either equalize or become better. Never know. I mean, especially with the time ticking down, who knows? People make mistakes. But I'm not just going to just give up, right? Also, and that depends on the position. Like if I lost a queen for nothing and I'm playing against a player that's about my level, or even not even necessarily my level, but just depends. If I'm dead lost, like I'm not going to waste my mental, emotional energy if it's clear that they're going to be able to win this position, right? So it depends. Um, Another piece I thought was interesting that I haven't thought much of, but I think I'm guilty of as well, is like I've gotten more intentional about talking to other people before I play games. Like I used to be a person that just kind of came in, played the game, check the scores, and just leave. But now I've been more open to communicating with people, and sometimes I'll talk to people before we play a game, and I won't realize like sometimes like people talking to people like you realize how smart they are, and then like that itself may intimidate you, though it's like being an intelligent person doesn't necessarily equal being a great chess player. And that's something I had to think about and reflect on. Like I remember speaking to someone who was a lawyer, and he said a lot of words that I didn't understand, but it sounded really smart. And then we sat down and played each other, and like I'm just kind of like some guy, in my mind, like I'm some guy in jeans and a t-shirt, and he's there in a suit. And something about that, and just the language he uses and how articulate he was, influenced my way of playing that wasn't that subtle really. It's like not that I made some like dubious moves, but I was playing more careful than I normally do. I wasn't as aggressive. I wasn't taking not that I take unnecessary risks, but I wasn't taking like more risks to kind of put on an attack. It's more so just kind of waiting to see what he would do. And it was very positional, which I'm growing to become more positional, but at that time I wasn't, right? So being aware, like being self-aware of like how things influence you will take you far because it influences how you think and the decisions you make, which will impact your outcomes, right? So just something to think about. I'm curious to like how much you may have been thinking about the psychology of chess, and if you have, like, what have you noticed about yourself? How have you kind of like changed the way you think and behave? Just whatever it comes to mind for you. I know it's still like an ongoing thing that I'm thinking about, but I think about it less given that I've had a lot of experience with a lot of other people. And now I think moving forward, I think I'll be more intentional about that for myself, and more intentional about bringing that up when I'm teaching people to play. Because I tend to keep everything about the board and like more specific critical thinking processes, like just what's going on in that front. But I haven't spent as much time thinking about how other people affect us, especially with in-person play. Because online, you don't see the person; it's not the same. There's still some psychological elements to it, but it's not like sitting face to face in front of a person. Um, just something to think about.